Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Vernon Coleridge, but most folks just call me Vern. I've been a ranger in Daniel Boone National Forest for 19 years now, ever since I graduated high school back in '43. While my daddy and granddaddy spent their lives digging coal out of these Kentucky mountains, I chose to protect what was left above ground. I'm what they call a cave rescue and underground safety specialist. Fancy title for someone who crawls into dark holes to pull out people who shouldn't have been there in the first place. In 19 years, I've saved 47 souls from caves, mine shafts, and underground rivers. I know every documented hole in the ground for 40 miles around Bell Mountain. This morning started like any other November day in 1962. The fog was thick as cotton, rolling through the hollers like ghosts looking for somewhere to rest. My wife Martha packed me a lunch of cornbread and beans, kissed my cheek, and reminded me to be careful. Our boys, Tommy and Jake, were already off to school before I even finished my coffee. "You be back for supper," Martha said. Same as every morning. "Don't go getting yourself lost in them old mines." I laughed and told her what I always did. "Honey, I know these mountains better than the back of my hand. Ain't nothing down there that can surprise me anymore." Lord, how wrong I was. The call came in around 9 o'clock. 3 college boys from the University of Kentucky had gone into the restricted mining area near Bell Mountain to study coal formations. That was yesterday morning. They were supposed to be back by sunset, but nobody had seen hide nor hair of them. I loaded up my truck with the usual gear: 200 feet of manila rope, my carbide headlamp, methane detector, and old Pete. That's what I called my canary in the little brass cage. Pete had saved my life more times than I could count by warning me about bad air in the mines. The drive to Bell Mountain took me through some of the prettiest country in Kentucky, but also some of the most dangerous. These hills were Swiss cheese, with old mine shafts from the 1800s. Most maps didn't even show half of them. The coal companies had dug wherever they pleased back then, leaving behind a maze of tunnels that went on for miles underground. As I drove deeper into the forest, the fog got thicker. It was the kind of fog that played tricks on your eyes and made sounds carry in strange ways. I'd heard old-timers say that November fog in these parts could make you hear voices from the past, but I never put much stock in such talk. "The devil's real enough," my granddaddy used to say. "But he don't come prowling around in hollers, he's in men's hearts." I found the college boy's car parked at the old mining road that led to shaft number 7. That particular mine had been sealed off for good reason. Back in 1847, 67 miners died in there when methane gas exploded. Local folks called it cursed, but I knew better. It was just dangerous, like most of the old workings. The shaft entrance was bigger than most, about 8 feet wide and 10 feet tall, carved right into the limestone face of the mountain. Someone had pulled away the warning signs and moved the metal barriers. Fresh footprints led into the darkness, along with tire tracks from equipment carts. I checked my watch, 10:30 a.m. I had plenty of daylight left, and the fog might burn off by afternoon. I strapped on my headlamp, lit the carbide flame, and started into the mine with Pete's cage in one hand and my rope coiled over my shoulder. The tunnel sloped down at a gentle angle, supported by rotting timber beams that creaked when the wind blew through them. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, echoing off the rock walls. My carbide flame threw dancing shadows that made the tunnel seem alive. About 50 yards in, I found the first piece of equipment: a geology hammer with UK Geology Depth stamped on the handle. It was sitting right in the middle of the tunnel, perfectly placed like someone had set it down on purpose. But the strange thing was, there were no footprints around it in the coal dust. I picked up the hammer and called out, "Hello, University of Kentucky Geology Team. This is Ranger Coleridge. Can you hear me?" My voice echoed down the tunnel and came back, changed somehow, like it had traveled much farther than it should have. But there was no answer. 20 yards deeper, I found a sample bag full of coal chunks, then a notebook with detailed drawings of rock formations. Each piece of equipment was placed in a perfect line leading deeper into the mine, like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. But still, no footprints except the ones at the entrance. That's when I heard it for the first time. A low, 7-note whistle melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was familiar, too familiar. My granddaddy used to hum that exact tune while he worked, in the mines. But granddaddy had been dead for 15 years. I stood there in that tunnel, listening to my granddaddy's song echo off the walls, and felt something cold crawl up my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature underground. The melody was perfect, every note exactly as I remembered it from childhood when he'd tuck me in at night. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "Is someone there?" The whistling stopped. Pete, the canary, shifted nervously in his cage, ruffling his yellow feathers. That bird had been with me for 3 years and never acted spooked unless there was something to be spooked about. I forced myself to think logically. Sound traveled strangely in these old mines. Maybe one of the college boys was hurt and delirious, whistling an old tune he'd heard somewhere. Maybe the limestone formations were creating weird acoustics that made normal sounds seem supernatural. I kept following the line of equipment deeper into the mine. The tunnel branched off in 3 directions, but the college boys' gear continued straight ahead down the main shaft. My carbide flame was burning strong and yellow, which meant the air was good. Pete was calm again. Everything seemed normal, except for that nagging feeling that I was being watched. The main tunnel opened up into a larger chamber that I'd mapped years ago. It was about 30 feet across with a pool of black water in the center. I'd always called it the mirror room because the water was so still, it reflected your headlamp like a perfect mirror. But today, something was wrong with the mirror room. The college boys were there, or what was left of them. All 3 bodies were positioned around the edge of the water pool, sitting upright with their backs against the wall. Their geology equipment was neatly arranged in front of each one. They looked peaceful, like they'd just sat down to rest and never woke up. But peaceful or not, they were definitely dead. I rushed to the first body, a young man with sandy hair and UK jacket. No pulse, skin cold as the mine air. No obvious injuries, no blood, no signs of violence. He could have been sleeping, except for the coal dust that covered him like a thin blanket. The second and third bodies were the same. Clean deaths, no trauma, just that strange coal dust covering them like someone had gently sprinkled it over their bodies after they died. I checked my radio to call for backup, but all I got was static mixed with something that sounded like whistling. Not the same tune as before, but definitely whistling coming through the radio speaker. That's when Jake Holloway's voice crackled through. "Vern, you copy? Over." Jake was my backup ranger, stationed about 15 miles away. I'd worked with him for 8 years, and he was solid as they come. "Jake, I'm in Shaft 7. Found the college boys. They're dead, but something ain't right about it. How fast can you get here?" "Already on my way." Jake's voice came through clearer now. "Should be there in 20 minutes. "What do you mean something ain't right?" I looked at the 3 bodies again, trying to put my finger on what was bothering me. They're positioned too neat, like someone arranged them. And Jake, they're covered in coal dust, but there's been no cave-in. No structural damage anywhere. "Copy that. Stay put until I get there. Don't go any deeper alone." But as I stood there waiting for Jake, that whistling started up again. This time, it was coming from deeper in the mine, from a tunnel I'd never noticed before. It branched off from the back of the mirror room, hidden behind a fall of rocks that I could have sworn wasn't there on my last survey. The tune was different now, a simple children's song that Jake used to sing when we went fishing together. But Jake was 15 miles away, and this sounded like it was coming from just around the corner. Pete started chirping, frantically in his cage, flapping his wings like he wanted to get as far away from that tunnel as possible. Smart bird. I should have listened to him. Instead, I found myself walking toward that hidden passage. My rational mind was screaming at me to wait for backup, but something about that whistling was pulling me forward like a fish on a line. It was Jake's voice. I was sure of it. Maybe he'd found another entrance and come in from the other side. The new tunnel was different from the main mine workings. The walls were smooth limestone, carved by water instead of pickaxes. It curved gently downward, and my footsteps echoed strangely, sometimes loud, sometimes muffled, like the tunnel was changing size as I walked. The whistling got louder and clearer. It was definitely the fishing song Jake always sang, note perfect. But now there were words mixed in with the melody, too soft to understand but definitely human speech. "Jake?" I called out. "That you up there?" The whistling stopped instantly. Then Jake's voice, clear as day. "Vern, come quick. I found something you need to see." I hurried around the next bend and found myself in a natural cave chamber I'd never seen before. Flowstone formations hung from the ceiling like curtains, and the walls sparkled with mineral deposits. It was beautiful, but empty. "No, Jake, Jake, where are you?" His voice came from another passage leading off the chamber. "Over here, hurry." I followed the voice through passage after passage, each one leading deeper into the mountain. The strange thing was, my carbide flame kept burning strong, and Pete stayed calm in his cage. By all rights, we should have hit bad air or run out of oxygen by now. That's when I realized I'd been walking for over an hour, but my watch still showed the same time as when I'd entered the hidden tunnel. And Jake's voice was always just around the next corner, always calling me deeper, but I never caught up to him. By the time I finally stopped and turned around, I couldn't find my way back to the mirror room. Every passage looked the same, and my carbide flame was casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. That's when I heard them. More voices, dozens of them, all whistling different tunes from somewhere deep in the darkness ahead. And I knew, with the kind of bone-deep certainty that comes when you're in real trouble, that none of those voices belonged to anyone still breathing. I stood in that flowstone chamber, listening to a choir of whistling voices that seemed to come from every direction at once, and tried to get my bearings. My rational mind was fighting hard against what my ears were telling me. Gas pockets could cause hallucinations. Temperature changes could create weird air currents that carried sound. There had to be a logical explanation. But Pete, the canary, was singing now, not chirping in alarm. He was singing along with those ghostly whistles, which made no sense at all. Canaries were supposed to die when they encountered dangerous gases, not join in with phantom choirs. I checked my equipment. Methane detector, reading normal. Carbide flame still burning bright yellow. Radio still producing nothing but static and whistling. According to my instruments, everything was fine. According to my gut, I was in more trouble than I'd ever been in my life. "Jake," I shouted as loud as I could, "if you can hear me, stop playing games. Something weird is happening in here." One of the whistling voices separated itself from the others and came closer. It was Jake's voice, all right, but now I could make out the words he was singing. Asterisk. "Down in the mine where the coal dust flies, down in the mine where the miner dies, follow the sound and you'll never leave, follow the sound and you'll never grieve." Asterisk. That wasn't any fishing song I'd ever heard. The voice was coming from a narrow passage that sloped steeply downward, against every instinct screaming at me to turn around. I followed it. What choice did I have? My only way out was to find Jake and get him to help me navigate back to the surface. The passage opened into the largest underground chamber I'd ever seen. It was huge. Big enough to hold a church, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness beyond my headlamp's reach. But what stopped me cold wasn't the size of the chamber, it was the bodies. They were everywhere, positioned throughout the cavern like an underground congregation. Men in mining clothes from different time periods, some in overalls that looked recent, others in the rough wool and leather of the 1800s. I even saw a few in what looked like Civil War uniforms. All of them were sitting upright, all covered in that same thin layer of coal dust, all perfectly preserved like they'd just sat down to rest a moment ago. And they were all whistling. Not with their mouths. Their lips weren't moving. The sound was coming from inside them somehow, like their bodies had become musical instruments. Each one whistled a different tune, but together they created the most beautiful and terrifying harmony I'd ever heard. I found Jake sitting cross-legged near the center of the chamber, his ranger uniform already dusted with coal. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead, and that children's fishing song was coming from somewhere inside his chest. "Jake!" I ran to him, shook his shoulders. His body was solid, real, but cold as stone. "Jake, can you hear me?" His head turned toward me slowly, like a rusty hinge. When he spoke, his voice came from his throat, but the whistling kept coming from his chest at the same time. "Vern," he said in a dreamy, distant tone, "you made it. Isn't it beautiful? We're all here together now, forever. What happened to you? How long have you been down here?" Jake smiled, but his eyes stayed empty. Time doesn't work the same way down here. Could be minutes, could be years. The whistling man takes care of us. Keeps us safe, keeps us from suffering. What whistling man? Jake, we need to get out of here. Something's wrong with this place. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I turned around and saw him walking out of the shadows at the far end of the chamber. He was tall, maybe 8 feet, and shaped like a man, but made of coal dust and limestone. Where his face should have been, there were 2 deep holes that whistled haunting melodies when he breathed. His mouth opened onto darkness so deep it seemed to go all the way through the mountain. When he spoke, it was with the voices of everyone in that chamber, including Jake, a chorus of the dead speaking in perfect unison. Welcome, Vernon Coleridge, grandson of Thomas Coleridge, great-grandson of Samuel Coleridge. Your family has fed these mountains for generations. Now it's time for you to rest. I backed away, pulling out my iron pickaxe, the one tool every cave rescue ranger carries. Stay back. I don't know what you are, but I'm getting out of here. The thing that might have been laughing, if something made of coal dust and malice could laugh. Look around you, Vernon. These are all the men who tried to leave. Miners, explorers, foolish children who wandered too deep. I preserve them. I keep them from the suffering above. Down here, there is no pain, no fear, no death. Only the eternal song. I looked at the bodies again and noticed something that made my blood run cold. Some of their clothes were rotted with age, but the men themselves looked fresh. The Civil War soldiers should have been nothing but bones by now, but their skin was perfect, their hair still thick. You keep them alive? I keep them from dying, the creature said. From truly dying. Above ground, death comes with terror and pain. Down here, I preserve their final breath in coal dust. They sing forever in the moment before death, when the spirit is purest. It raised one massive hand toward me, and I saw that its fingers were made of tiny bones held together with black dust. Your grandfather Thomas sang beautifully when I took him. Your great-grandfather Samuel had the voice of an angel. You carry their music in your blood. My granddaddy died in his bed, surrounded by family. His body died in his bed. His spirit, his music, his final breath, that belongs to me. It has always belonged to me. Listen. From somewhere in the choir of voices, I heard my granddaddy's 7-note whistle, the same tune that had drawn me into the mine. It was him, preserved at the moment of death, whistling for eternity in this underground hell. The creature started walking toward me, and everywhere its feet touched, coal dust swirled up like tiny tornadoes. The other bodies began turning their heads to watch, still whistling their eternal songs. Join them, Vernon. Let me preserve you before the world above breaks your spirit. Before age and sorrow, steal your music. Down here, you'll sing forever. I hefted my pickaxe and backed toward what looked like another tunnel entrance. I've got a wife and 2 boys up there. I ain't staying in any grave, no matter how pretty you make it sound. The creature's mouth opened wider, and the whistling from its throat became a roar that shook dust from the ceiling. You cannot leave. No one leaves. The mountain keeps what it claims. That's when the whole chamber started to shake, and I realized the thing wasn't just threatening me, it was bringing the whole place down to stop me from escaping. Rocks began falling from the ceiling, and the narrow passages I'd followed to get here were sealing themselves with stone and coal dust. But there was one tunnel that was getting brighter instead of darker, and I could hear something impossible coming from it, the sound of running water. The underground river saved my life, as rocks crashed down around me and the coal dust creature roared its fury. I ran toward that tunnel where I could hear water rushing. My granddaddy had told me stories about underground streams in these mountains, how they carved new passages through the limestone, how they connected to springs and creeks on the surface. Behind me, the whistling man was growing larger, its body pulling coal dust from the walls and ceiling to add to its mass. The preserved bodies of its victims were standing up now, still whistling but moving like sleepwalkers toward me. You cannot cross the water. The creature bellowed in its chorus of dead voices. The river cleanses what I have claimed. It will wash away everything that makes you sing. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew running water when I heard it. The tunnel curved sharply downward, and suddenly I was splashing through an ankle-deep stream that flowed fast and cold over smooth stone. The moment my boots hit the water, the whistling behind me became screams. Not just from the creature, but from all the preserved dead. It was like they were being tortured, and maybe they were. Maybe crossing that water was the only way to truly die, to escape the creature's preservation. I heard Jake's voice rise above the others. "Vern, don't leave us here, please." But I kept running through the water, following the stream as it wound through natural limestone caves. My carbide flame flickered in the spray, and Pete was silent in his cage. The water was so cold it burned, and I could feel something strange happening to my skin where it touched the stream. The coal dust that had been gathering on my clothes and hands was washing away, but it felt like it was taking something else with it. Memories, maybe. The deeper I waded, the fuzzier my thoughts became. I stumbled and fell face first into the stream. The shock of the cold water knocked the wind out of me, but it also knocked something else loose, the creature's hold on my mind. Suddenly I could think clearly again, and I realized how close I'd come to joining that choir of the dead. The stream led through a series of narrow passages, barely wide enough for a man. I had to crawl through some sections, dragging Pete's cage behind me and trying to keep my carbide flame from going out. Behind me, the roaring and screaming grew fainter, but never stopped entirely. After what felt like hours, I saw something impossible. Actual daylight filtering down through cracks in the stone above. The stream had carved its way to the surface somewhere, and I was going to make it out alive. I climbed up toward the light, using tree roots and rock ledges to pull myself out of the cave system. When I finally emerged, gasping and shaking, I found myself in a creek bed about 2 miles from where I'd entered Shaft 7. The sun was setting. According to my watch, I'd been underground for 18 hours, but it felt like days. Pete was dead, in his cage. Not from bad air. His little body was covered in the same coal dust that I'd seen on the victims, like the creature had tried to claim him too. But the running water had washed most of it away, leaving just a few dark specks under his yellow feathers. I looked at my own hands and saw coal dust caked under my fingernails, black as night and hard as stone. I tried to scrub it out with creek water, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it had become part of me. That's when I heard it again, faint whistling coming from the direction of Bell Mountain. Not my granddaddy's tune this time, but Jake's fishing song. Still down there, still preserved, still calling for me to come back. I ran all the way to my truck and drove straight to the ranger station to report what had happened. But when I tried to tell the story, the words came out wrong. Instead of talking about coal dust creatures and preserved dead, I heard myself saying things like structural collapse, and methane gas, and equipment failure. It was like the creature had left something in my mind, some kind of protection for itself. Every time I tried to tell the truth, lies came out of my mouth instead. The official report listed Jake Holloway as missing, presumed dead in a mine collapse. The 3 college boys were declared victims of the same cave-in. Shaft 7 was permanently sealed with concrete and steel, marked as too dangerous for any further exploration. But I knew the truth, even if I couldn't speak it. The whistling man was still down there with his choir of the dead, still collecting the final breaths of anyone foolish enough to enter his domain. And somewhere in that underground cathedral, Jake was sitting cross-legged in the coal dust, whistling his fishing song for eternity. I quit the ranger service 2 weeks later. Told everyone I was too shook up by losing Jake and those college boys to keep working underground. Martha didn't ask too many questions. She could see the change in me, the way I'd wake up at night listening for whistling that wasn't there. We moved the family to Louisville, got me a job with the city parks department. Nothing underground, nothing involving caves or mines, just mowing grass and trimming trees under the open sky where I could always see the sun. But the coal dust under my fingernails never went away. I tried everything, soap, bleach, even had a doctor look at it. He said it was just deep staining from my years working around mines. Nothing to worry about. But I knew better. It was the whistling man's mark, his claim on me, proof that I'd been touched by something that shouldn't exist. Sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind was just right, I could hear them singing. Not just Jake and my granddaddy, but all of them, the whole choir of the dead whistling their eternal songs from beneath Bell Mountain. Martha couldn't hear it, the boys couldn't hear it, but it was there, always there. The worst part was the reports that started coming in from other parts of Kentucky. Missing hikers near old mine shafts, Strange whistling sounds heard underground. More sealed tunnels and structural collapses that didn't quite make sense when you looked at the details. I started keeping a scrapbook of newspaper clippings, trying to map the pattern. The disappearances followed the old coal seams, spreading through eastern Kentucky like an infection. Every few months, another story about lost explorers or missing cavers, always near abandoned mines. Always with that official explanation of equipment failure or natural disasters. One night in 1965, 3 years after Bell Mountain, I got a phone call that chilled me to the bone. "Is this Vernon Coleridge?" The voice was young, excited. "My name is David Harrison, University of Kentucky Geology Department. I'm calling about the mine incident in Daniel Boone Forest. The one where 3 of our students died." "I don't know nothing about that," I lied. "Same as always. Sir, I think you do. I've been researching the coal formations in that area, and I've found some anomalies. Passages that aren't on any survey maps. Acoustic properties that don't match the geology. I think there's something important down there that everyone's missed." I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles went white. "Son, let me give you some advice. Stay away from those old mines. All of them. Find yourself another research project." "But Mr. Coleridge, I've already been down there, just last weekend. I heard the most amazing sounds, like a whole choir singing underground. I've never heard anything like it. I'm putting together a team to go back and record it properly." I hung up on him. 3 days later, I saw David Harrison's name in the obituaries. Hiking accident, near Bell Mountain, body never recovered. I threw away my scrapbook that night, but I couldn't throw away the knowledge. The whistling man was growing stronger, his choir was getting larger, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do to stop it. Every time I tried to warn someone, the creature's protection kicked in and lies came out of my mouth instead. So I'm writing this down now, hoping that maybe the written word can slip past whatever hold that thing has on my voice. If you're reading this, if you're thinking about exploring old mines in eastern Kentucky, listen to me. Stay out, stay far away. If you hear whistling underground, don't follow it. Don't try to find the source. Run toward the light, toward the surface, toward the world of the living. Because once the whistling man starts singing your tune, you'll never stop humming along. I'm an old man now, past 70 and feeling every year of it. Martha's been gone 5 years, cancer took her slow and painful. The boys are grown with families of their own. Sometimes, I think about going back to Bell Mountain, about following that 7-note, whistle down into the dark, where my granddaddy waits. At least down there, the songs never end. But then I look at my hands, at that coal dust still caked under my nails after all these years, and I remember that I escaped for a reason. Maybe not completely. Maybe no one ever escapes completely once they've been marked. But enough to live, enough to love, enough to warn others. The whistling man can keep his choir of the dead. This old ranger's got more living to do up here in the light. Even if I do wake up every morning humming a tune I learned in the darkness, deep beneath Bell Mountain, where the dead sing forever and the coal dust never settles. Just remember what I told you. If you hear whistling in the mines, run toward the light. Don't follow the sound. My name is Rebecca Stoneheart, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a park ranger at Monongahela National Forest for 12 years now. And I was the first woman they ever hired for this district. That was back in 1956, when most folks thought a woman had no business climbing rocks or rescuing people from them. But I proved them wrong. I grew up here, in West Virginia, daughter of coal miners, who taught me that mountains don't care if you're man or woman, They'll kill you just the same if you don't respect them. My daddy always said I had rocks in my blood, and maybe he was right. I've climbed every route on Seneca Rocks more times than I can count. Seneca Rocks rises 900 feet straight up from the valley floor, like a giant stone knife cutting the sky. It's made of quartzite that's older than anything you can imagine, and when the wind hits it just right, it makes sounds. Echoes, mostly. Sometimes it sounds almost like singing, but that's just physics, sound waves, bouncing between the rock faces. At least, that's what I always told the tourists who asked about the mountain spirits. Mountain spirits are just echoes and wind, I'd say. Physics explains everything that happens on rock faces. I live with my mother in a small house about 20 minutes from the ranger station. She's getting on in years, and somebody needs to look after her. I never married, by choice. Hard to find a man who understands why a woman needs to spend her days hanging from ropes on vertical walls. Besides, the mountains are enough company for me. My specialty is technical rock rescue and climbing safety. When someone gets stuck on those walls, they call me. I know every handhold, every crack, every loose rock that might give way. I use the same gear the climbers use: hemp ropes, iron pitons, and my own 2 hands. The difference is, I know how to get people down alive. This spring has been strange, though. We've had more thunderstorms than usual, and the winds have been acting up. Sometimes I hear sounds from the rocks that don't quite make sense. But rocks are funny things. They expand and contract with temperature changes, shift with the seasons. A mountain is always moving, just too slow for most people to notice. It was May 15th, 1968, when everything changed. I remember the date because it was the day I stopped believing in physics and started believing in things I can't explain. The call came in around 3 in the afternoon. 4 experienced climbers, 2 men and 2 women from Virginia, had been attempting an overnight climb on the North Peak route. They'd been up there since yesterday morning, and other climbers reported hearing screaming around dawn. Not the usual yells of excitement or instruction, but real terror. I gathered my gear: 200 feet of rope, a full rack of pitons and carabiners, my headlamp, emergency bivouac equipment, and enough food and water for 2 days. The North Peak route is about 2 hours of hiking just to reach the base, and then it's straight up. If these folks were hurt, I'd need to rappel down to them and possibly spend the night on the wall. The weather was turning bad, too. Dark clouds were building to the west, and I could feel that electric feeling in the air that comes before a big storm. The wind was picking up, making the trees whisper and bend. But I'd climbed in worse conditions. These people were counting on me. As I drove toward the trailhead, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about the mountain today. The usual sounds were wrong somehow. Instead of the normal wind noise and bird calls, there was something else, something that sounded almost like singing. But that was impossible. I knew every sound those stones could make. The hike to the base of North Peak took me exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes. I've done it so many times I could probably do it blindfolded. But today, everything felt off. The forest was too quiet. No squirrels chattering, no birds calling. Even the wind seemed muffled, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. When I reached the base of the climbing route, I found the first sign that something was seriously wrong. The climbers' base camp was still there: 2 tents, cooking gear, extra ropes and hardware neatly arranged, but there were no people. And the arrangement of their gear was strange. All their extra pitons and carabiners had been laid out in perfect spirals on the flat rocks around the camp, not scattered like you'd expect if they'd left in a hurry, but arranged in careful patterns. No climber I knew was that neat, especially not when dealing with an emergency. I called out, my voice echoing off the rock walls. "Hello, this is Ranger Stoneheart. Can anyone hear me?" My voice came back to me changed, distorted by the stone. But there was something else mixed in with the echo. Something that sounded like an answer, but not in my voice. I shook my head and began checking their gear. Their climbing ropes were still here. But when I examined them closely, my blood went cold. The ends weren't frayed or worn like they should be after a long climb. They were cut. Clean, straight cuts like someone had taken a knife to them. But that made no sense. There are no sharp edges on Seneca rocks that could cut a rope that cleanly. The quartzite is rough and jagged, sure, but it would fray a rope, not slice it like a blade. I radioed back to the station. Base, this is Stoneheart. I'm at the North Peak Base Camp. Found the missing climbers' gear, but no sign of the climbers. Something's not right here. The radio crackled back. Copy that, Becca. What's your assessment? But when the voice came through, it didn't sound like David Millwright, my usual backup. It sounded like me. My own voice, answering myself. I stared at the radio. David? Is that you? This is David, came the reply, but still in my voice. What's your status? I switched the radio off and on again. Static filled the air, and then, faintly, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Singing. 4 voices in harmony, echoing through the radio like they were coming from very far away. I tried the radio again. This time, David's real voice came through, scratchy but normal. Becca, you there? You cut out for a minute. I'm here. David, are you getting any strange radio interference today? No more than usual. These mountains always mess with the signals. You find anything? I looked up at the rock face towering above me. 900 feet of vertical stone, with the climbing route zigzagging up through cracks and ledges. Somewhere up there, 4 people had vanished. I'm going up, I told him. Their gear is here, but the ropes are cut. I need to see what happened on the wall. I started my climb at 4:30 p.m. The route I know by heart, up through the first pitch to ledge 1, then traverse left to the chimney system, then straight up the face to the top. Each section has its own challenges, its own personality. But I've climbed this route dozens of times. 20 feet up, I placed my first piton in a crack I've used 100 times before. The iron spike slid into the rock easily, and I gave it the usual test tap with my hammer. It should have rung with a clear, metallic note. Instead, it hummed. A low, musical tone that seemed to come from deep inside the mountain. And as I hung there, listening, I heard other tones joining it, like the mountain itself was singing. I told myself it was just the wind in the cracks. Quartzite can make strange sounds when air moves through it at the right speed and pressure. But the air was still, dead calm. 50 feet higher, at the first major ledge, I found something that made me stop climbing altogether. Carved into the solid rock face, deep enough that I could feel them with my fingers, were 4 names. Sarah, Mike, Jennifer, and Tom. Below each name was a date. The 14th of May, 1968. Yesterday. But you can't carve names into quartzite with climbing gear. It's too hard. You'd need diamond-tipped tools and hours of work. These letters were smooth and deep, like they'd been melted into the stone. I radioed David again. Base, I need you to contact the Virginia authorities. Get me the names of our missing climbers. While I waited for his response, I continued examining the ledge. There were more spirals here, small stones arranged in perfect circles, pieces of climbing hardware laid out in patterns that hurt to look at. And scratched into the rock next to the names, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, were symbols I didn't recognize. Symbols that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. David's voice crackled through. Got the names, Becca. Sarah Chen, Mike Rodriguez, Jennifer Walsh, and Tom Brennan. Does that match what you found? I stared at the names carved in the says. It matches exactly. That's when I heard the singing start for real. Not through the radio this time, but coming from the rock itself. 4 voices in perfect harmony, beautiful and clear, echoing from somewhere inside the mountain. The melody was haunting, like a hymn or a lullaby, but the words weren't in any language I recognized. And then, impossible as it sounds, I heard my name woven into the song. Rebecca, Rebecca. Come and sing with us, Rebecca. I looked up at the remaining 500 feet of vertical rock above me, and I realized that I was going to climb it whether I wanted to or not. Because somewhere up there, 4 people were singing, and I was the only one who could hear them. I should have rappelled down right then. Every instinct I'd developed in 12 years of mountain rescue was screaming at me to get off that wall. But I'm a ranger, and those people were up there somewhere, and they needed help. The next pitch was the hardest part of the route, 100 feet of nearly vertical climbing through a crack system called the Devil's Chimney. I'd climbed it dozens of times, but today the rock felt different under my hands. Warm, almost alive, like touching skin instead of stone. Halfway up the chimney, my rope started behaving strangely. I'd feed it through a carabiner, and it would seem to stick, like something was holding it from above. Then it would suddenly release, sending me swinging sideways into the wall. Each time I hit the rock, I felt a vibration run through the entire mountain, like a heartbeat. The singing was getting louder now, and I could make out the individual voices. Sarah had a clear soprano that soared above the others. Mike sang bass, deep and resonant. Jennifer and Tom harmonized in the middle, their voices weaving together like they'd been singing together for years. But they'd only been climbing together for 2 days, according to their permits. At the top of the chimney, I pulled myself onto a narrow ledge barely wide enough for both feet. This was Rest Ledge, where climbers usually stop to catch their breath and reorganize their gear. Today, it wasn't empty. Sitting against the back wall of the ledge, perfectly preserved and positioned like they were taking a break, were 4 climbers. Sarah, Mike, Jennifer, and Tom, I presumed. They sat in a neat row, their hands folded in their laps, their eyes closed, their mouths open as if they were singing. But they weren't breathing. I scrambled across the ledge toward them, already reaching for my first aid kit. "Hey, can you hear me?" As I got closer, I realized why they weren't breathing. They weren't really there, not completely. I could see through them, like they were made of colored glass, and their skin had a crystalline quality, like they were slowly turning into quartz themselves. But they were definitely singing. The beautiful harmony was coming from their translucent mouths, and when I said their names, their eyes opened and looked directly at me. "Rebecca?" Sarah's voice was like wind chimes. "We've been waiting for you. How long have you been here?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know the answer. "Since yesterday," Mike said, his bass voice rumbling through the stone. "Since the mountain invited us in." "Invited you in? What does that mean?" Jennifer smiled, and her teeth sparkled like diamonds. "Touch the wall, Rebecca. Feel how warm it is. The mountain is alive, and it's lonely. It wants us to stay and sing with it forever." I backed away from them, but the ledge was only 6 feet wide. Behind me was a 500-foot drop. In front of me were 4 people who should have been dead but were sitting there singing like angels. "You need to come down with me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your families are worried. People are looking for you." Tom laughed, and the sound echoed through the mountain like bells. "We can't leave, Rebecca. We're part of the song now. But you can join us. The mountain has been waiting for someone like you, someone who knows every note it can sing." That's when I noticed that my own gear was starting to change. The iron pitons clipped to my harness were vibrating, humming in harmony with the voices. My rope had developed a crystalline sheen, like it was turning to stone. And my hands were becoming translucent. I looked down at my palms in horror. I could see the lines and wrinkles, but I could also see through them to the rock beneath. The mountain wasn't just taking these climbers. It was turning them into part of itself. "The process is painless," Sarah assured me. "And the music is so beautiful once you become part of it. Listen." The 4 voices rose together in a chord that seemed to shake the entire rock formation. But underneath their harmony, I heard something else. Dozens of other voices, maybe hundreds, all singing the same eternal song. All the climbers who had disappeared on Seneca Rocks over the years, absorbed into the living stone. I tried to radio for help, but when I keyed the mic, only singing came out. My voice had joined the chorus, whether I wanted it to or not. That's when the rock face behind the singers began to change. The solid quartzite became transparent like glass, and I could see into the mountain itself. It was hollow, filled with chambers and passages that pulsed with soft light. And in every chamber, more singers sat in perfect circles, their crystalline forms glowing as they added their voices to the eternal song. 12 years you've climbed these walls," a new voice said, deeper than the others. It seemed to come from the mountain itself. 12 years you've touched our stone and never understood what we were offering you." The rock face in front of me began to bulge outward, forming the suggestion of a massive face carved from the living stone. Eyes like cave openings, a mouth like a crevasse, all of it radiating an ancient intelligence. "We are not cruel, Rebecca Stoneheart. We offer immortality. We offer perfect harmony. We offer an end to loneliness and pain. All we ask in return is your voice, your breath, your warmth. Become one with the stone and sing with us forever." My legs were already stiffening, the transformation creeping up from my feet. Soon I wouldn't be able to move at all. But I still had my iron pitons, and iron was the one thing that seemed to disrupt whatever process was changing us. I pulled the largest piton from my gear rack and drove it hard into the rock face. The mountain screamed a sound like avalanche and earthquake combined. The four singers wavered like mirages, and for a moment I could see through the illusion to what they really were. Four desiccated corpses, their skin gray and brittle, their eyes gone, sitting exactly where I'd found them. The singing hadn't stopped, but now I could see it. Was coming from the mountain itself, using their dried vocal cords like instruments. "Iron burns us," the mountain voice said, and now it sounded angry. "But you cannot carry enough iron to hurt us permanently. Join us willingly, or we will take you anyway." The rock ledge beneath my feet began to tilt, trying to slide me off into space. But I knew this mountain better than it knew itself. I'd climbed every inch of it, memorized every crack and hold. I drove another piton into the wall and clipped my rope to it. Then I did something that went against every instinct I had as a climber. I rappelled straight down into the Devil's Chimney, not following the normal route, but dropping as fast as I could while jamming iron pitons into every crack I passed. Each spike I placed sent shockwaves through the stone, and the singing became more discordant, more desperate. "You cannot escape us," the mountain howled. "We know every route down, we are every route down." But I wasn't taking a route. I was making my own, and I was using iron to burn a path through the living rock. What I did next probably saved my life, though I didn't understand why at the time. Instead of rappelling down the way I'd come up, I swung sideways into a crack system I'd never explored before. It was narrow, barely wide enough for my body, but my iron pitons bit deep into the walls, and the mountain's screaming got louder with each one I placed. The crack led into darkness, into parts of Seneca rocks that no climber had ever seen. My headlamp revealed smooth walls that curved like the inside of a throat, and everywhere I shined the light, I saw them crystallized climbers from decades past, all sitting in meditation poses, all with their mouths open in eternal song. 1,952, 1,947, 1,961. I read the dates carved near each group as I squeezed deeper into the mountain's gullet. Some of the bodies were so old they'd become fully mineralized, their flesh completely transformed into singing quartz. Others were more recent, still recognizably human but with skin like colored glass. The mountain's voice followed me into the depths. They came to us seeking challenge, seeking to test themselves against our strength. We gave them what they truly wanted, to become one with the stone they loved so much. I realized I was inside a vast network of chambers, all connected by narrow passages that twisted and turned like a circulatory system. This wasn't just a mountain, it was a living organism that had been feeding on climbers for over a century. Every climbing accident, every mysterious disappearance, had been the mountain, adding new voices to its choir. In the deepest chamber, I found the source of it all. A massive crystalline formation that pulsed with internal light, shaped roughly like a human heart. But this heart was the size of a car, and with each beat, it sent vibrations through the entire rock formation. The singing was loudest. Here, hundreds of voices in perfect harmony, and I realized this was the mountain's brain, its consciousness, the part of it that thought and felt and hungered. "You understand now?" The mountain's voice was all around me, coming from the walls themselves. "We have been here since before your people knew how to make fire. We have watched you evolve, watched you learn to climb, watched you reach always upward toward the sky. We fell in love with your ambition, your courage, your beautiful voices raised in joy and terror, so we decided to keep you." "You're killing them," I said, though my own voice was starting to sound crystalline, harmonic. "We are preserving them. Look around you, Rebecca. These singers will never age, never suffer, never die. They are part of something eternal now, something beautiful. Is that not better than your short, painful human lives?" I looked at the nearest group of crystallized climbers. A family, from the look of them, man, woman, and teenage boy. Their faces were peaceful, beatific, but their eyes were gone, replaced by tiny cave openings. And when the mountain heart pulsed, I could see movement inside those eye sockets, like something living in the darkness behind their faces. "They're not preserved," I whispered. "They're consumed. You're wearing them like masks." The mountain's anger shook the entire chamber. Stalactites crashed down around me, and the crystal heart flared with angry red light. "You know nothing of what we offer. We could make you a queen in our chorus, place you at the heart of our song. Your voice would ring through these stones for 10,000 years. But I was already moving, driven by terror and understanding. I had maybe a dozen iron pitons left, and I drove them into the crystal heart one after another. Each one sent cracks racing through the massive formation, and with each crack some of the singers' voices faltered. Iron, iron burns. The mountain gasped, its voice fragmenting into the individual voices of its victims. Why do you burn us? We only wanted to love you. Because love doesn't trap people, I said, and drove my last piton deep into the heart of the crystal. Love lets them choose. The crack that split the crystal heart was like lightning, racing from my iron spike to every wall of the chamber. The heart's pulsing light began to flicker and dim, and all around me, the crystallized singers began to crumble. Not back to life, they'd been dead too long for that. But their stone shells fell away like shed skin, and for just a moment, I saw them as they really were. Hundreds of climbers, men and women and children, all the people who disappeared on these rocks over the decades. They looked at me with gratitude in their eyes, and then they faded like smoke, finally free to move on to whatever comes after. The mountain was dying around me. Without the crystal heart to hold it together, the entire internal structure was collapsing. Water began pouring through cracks in the walls. The spring runoff that should have been flowing down the outside of the mountain was finding new paths through the hollowed interior. I had to get out, but every passage I'd used to get down here was collapsing. The mountain's death throes were bringing down tons of rock, sealing the chambers that had hidden its terrible secret for so long. That's when I felt it, a current of air, moving past my face. Air meant an opening to the outside. I followed that breeze through passages that were getting narrower and more unstable by the minute, climbing over piles of rubble, squeezing through gaps barely wide enough for my body. The air current led me to a crack in the mountain's base that hadn't existed when I'd started my climb. The mountain's death was creating new openings, new ways out. I squeezed through just as the final collapse began, emerging into daylight through a hole that sealed itself behind me with a sound, like thunder. I found myself at the base of Seneca Rocks, but the formation looked different now. Stress fractures ran up and down the main face, and chunks of stone had fallen away, revealing the hollow spaces inside. What had once been a majestic tower of solid rock now looked fragile, wounded. David found me there, 20 minutes later, sitting in the rubble, staring up at the changed mountain. I was solid again, fully human, but I could feel something different in my chest. When I breathed, I could hear echoes of that eternal song, and I knew I always would. The official report said there was a geological event, an underground water pocket that collapsed, causing structural damage to the climbing routes. The area was closed to climbing indefinitely, and new restrictions were put in place to prevent access to the most dangerous sections. They never found the bodies of Sarah, Mike, Jennifer, and Tom. The mountain had consumed them too completely, turned them too thoroughly into stone. But I know they're free now. Free from the crystal prison that had held so many for so long. I quit climbing the day after I came out of that mountain. Couldn't bring myself to touch rock anymore, because now I can hear things I was never meant to hear. Every stone formation sings, quietly, constantly. Most of them are just geological music, the sound of pressure and time and slow change. But some of them are different. Some of them are hungry. David asked me once why I changed careers so suddenly, why I transferred from rescue work to education. I told him I wanted to help people understand mountains better, respect them more. That's true, as far as it goes. What I didn't tell him is that I've been hearing reports from other climbing areas. Disappearances in the Tetons that don't add up. Strange sounds from Devil's Tower. Voices in the rock at Joshua Tree that sing lullabies in languages nobody recognizes. The thing that lived in Seneca Rocks wasn't unique. It was part of something bigger, older, that runs through the bones of the earth itself. And now that I've heard the song, I can recognize it anywhere. I keep a journal now, documenting every report of strange incidents at climbing areas across the country. My handwriting in the recent entries looks different somehow, more flowing, more musical, like I'm writing sheet music instead of words. Sometimes I catch myself humming while I write, harmonizing with sounds only I can hear. Last week, a climber from Colorado called me. He'd heard about my geological expertise and wanted to ask about some sounds he'd been hearing at a place called Lover's Leap. Beautiful singing, he said, that seemed to come from inside the rock itself. I told him what I tell everyone now. If the rocks start singing while you're climbing, don't listen to the words, just get down fast. Because the mountain spirits aren't gone. They're just sleeping, waiting for the next person who loves stone enough to spend eternity becoming part of it. And there are always people like that, people who feel the call of high places and vertical challenges. People like I used to be. I still live with my mother, still work for the Forest Service, but now I teach climbing safety classes instead of doing rescues. I tell people about proper gear, about reading weather conditions, about recognizing dangerous rock formations. And late at night, when the wind is right and I'm alone in my house, I can hear them all singing together every mountain, every cliff, every ancient stone formation that has learned to love human voices enough to keep them forever. The song is beautiful. Sometimes I have to remind myself why I shouldn't join in. But I never climb anymore, because I know that someday, if I touch stone while that music is playing, I might forget why I chose to stay human. And somewhere out there, new climbers are heading for mountains that sing, and I'm the only one who knows enough to warn them. If they listen, my name is Samuel Ravencrest, but everyone just calls me Sam. I've been a park ranger at Blackwater Falls for 20 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these woods had to offer. Turned out I was wrong. People ask me all the time if I believe in ghosts. My answer's always the same. I saw enough death in Vietnam to know that dead is dead. Ghosts are just guilt wearing a sheet, bad dreams that won't let go. At least, that's what I used to think. It was October of 1983 when everything changed. The fall rains had been heavy that year, turning Blackwater Canyon into a roaring beast. The waterfall that gives our park its name was running 15 feet higher than normal, and the water looked like rust-colored tea from all the tannic acid washing down from the mountains. Beautiful and deadly, that's autumn in West Virginia. I was sitting in my office that Tuesday morning, updating my rescue maps, when the call came in. A kayaker had made it out of the canyon, half drowned, and babbling about something he'd seen below the falls. 3 of his buddies weren't so lucky, they'd gone over the edge. He keeps talking about a bridge, Patricia Elkstone told me. She was the other ranger on duty, younger than me by 15 years, but sharp as they come, says he saw it underwater, made of bones. I grabbed my gear without comment. In 20 years, I'd pulled 47 bodies from various rivers and streams. You hear all kinds of things from people in shock. The brain does funny things when you're drowning. My specialty is water rescue and canyon safety. After Vietnam, where I spent 8 months crawling through tunnels barely wider than my shoulders, I figured I could handle any tight space nature threw at me. The Army taught me not to panic in the dark. The Park Service taught me how to read water like a book. I loaded my truck with 600 feet of military surplus rope, my cave diving gear, and enough climbing equipment to rappel into hell itself, if I had to. The drive to the canyon access point took 20 minutes on wet roads. The whole time, I kept thinking about those 3 kayakers. In water that cold and fast, you've got maybe 30 minutes before hypothermia shuts you down for good. The trailhead was empty, except for Patricia's truck and an ambulance. I could hear the roar of the falls even from the parking lot, a deep, constant thunder that you feel in your chest. The sound means the water's moving fast, carrying everything in its path downstream. The survivor's in the ambulance, Patricia said, meeting me at my truck. Paramedics say he'll be fine, but Sam, he won't stop talking about what he saw. I need to get down there while there's still light, I told her. You stay topside, keep the radio clear. She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Patricia had 2 kids at home. I had 2 daughters myself, both teenagers now, living with their mother in Charleston. My ex-wife used to say I loved these mountains more than I loved my family. She wasn't wrong, but she wasn't entirely right either. Some people need the wilderness to make sense of the world. I was one of them. The rappel point was a 1/4-mile hike through old-growth forest. The trees up here were massive hemlocks and oaks that had been saplings when this was still Cherokee land. The trail was slick with leaves and mud, and the sound of the falls grew louder with every step. At the cliff edge, I could see the full fury of Blackwater Falls. 57 feet of rust-colored water crashing into a narrow gorge lined with house-sized boulders. The spray created a permanent mist that caught the afternoon light, turning everything into a golden haze. It would have been beautiful if I wasn't thinking about 3 people somewhere at the bottom. I set my anchors in solid rock and double-checked every knot. You don't take chances with a 200-foot rappel. One mistake and you're just another body for someone else to recover. Radio check, I said into my handset. Got you, Sam. Patricia's voice crackled back. Be careful down there. Always am, I lied. The first 50 feet were easy, just steep rock face with plenty of handholds. Then I hit the spray zone, where the waterfall's mist made everything slippery as ice. My hands went numb in seconds, and I had to feel for each new grip. This was where the kayakers would have gone over, tumbling through the air before hitting the pool below. When I finally touched down on the boulder field at the canyon bottom, I was soaked through. The roar of the falls was deafening this close, a physical force that made my teeth hurt. The canyon here was only 30 feet wide, choked with massive rocks that the water had been grinding down for thousands of years. I started my search in the main pool, the deep basin directly below the falls where bodies usually ended up. The water was the color of strong tea. Visibility, maybe 3 feet on a good day. Today it was closer to 18 inches. I'd need my diving gear to search properly. That's when I saw the first bone. It was wedged between 2 rocks at the waterline, white as paper and worn smooth. Human femur, looked like. Not unusual. People had been dying in this canyon for over a century. What was unusual was the way it was positioned. Not random, not natural. It was placed there, like someone had carefully arranged it. I found another bone 10 feet away. Then another, and another. They were all positioned in a line, spanning from one massive boulder to another across 15 feet of churning water. The precision was impossible. Bones don't arrange themselves, and there's no way a human could have done this underwater in the dark. I keyed my radio. Patricia, I've got something weird down here. Static, then. Define weird. Bones, I said. Human bones, arranged in patterns. Sam, you're breaking up. Say again? I tried the radio twice. More. But all I got was white noise that sounded oddly like rushing water. Great. Radio dead, light fading, and 3 missing kayakers somewhere in this maze of rocks and rapids. I decided to gear up and dive the main pool. If the bodies were down there, I'd find them, and maybe I'd figure out what was going on with these bones. I should have climbed back up right then. Should have called for backup and better equipment. Should have listened to the little voice in my head that said something was very, very wrong here. But I didn't, because I was Sam Ravencrest, expert water rescue technician, and I'd never left a body behind in 20 years. That streak was about to end. The water was cold enough to steal my breath even through the wetsuit. I sank into the main pool, my diving light cutting a weak cone through the rust-colored murk. Visibility was worse than I'd thought, maybe 12 inches. I'd have to search by feel as much as sight. The pool was deeper than my maps showed, a good 40 feet to the bottom. The current was strong even here, pulling at me like invisible hands. I let myself sink slowly, sweeping my light back and forth. At 30 feet down, I found the first kayaker. He was wedged under a submerged log, his paddle still strapped to his wrist. Dead maybe 3 hours, judging by the body temperature. I'd need a bag to bring him up, but first I had to find the others. That's when I noticed the bones. They weren't just on the surface. They were down here too, arranged in careful patterns along the canyon floor. Femurs and tibias laid out in parallel lines. Rib bones curved into arches. Skulls positioned at regular intervals like mile markers. It looked like architecture, like someone was building something underwater. My training said, ignore it, focus on the mission, get the bodies, and get out. But I couldn't look away. The precision was impossible. Bones don't do this naturally, and no human could have arranged them in this current, in this darkness. I followed one line of bones deeper into the canyon, away from the main pool. The current was weaker here, and the canyon floor dropped into a series of smaller pools connected by narrow channels. The bone line continued through all of them, a perfect straight path leading somewhere into the darkness. That's when I saw the figure. Just a glimpse at first, something moving in the murk ahead. Translucent, like looking through colored glass. I kicked toward it, my light bouncing off suspended silt. The figure was crouched over the bones, arranging them with careful precision. It wore what looked like old work clothes, rough wool pants, suspenders, heavy boots. Its hands moved with purpose, placing a femur just so, adjusting a skull's position by millimeters. I froze. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The figure was underwater at least 50 feet down, but it wasn't drowning. It wasn't even trying to breathe. It turned to look at me. The face was wrong. Not decayed or skeletal, just incomplete. Like looking at someone through warped glass. I could see the basic features: eyes, nose, mouth, but they kept shifting, never quite solid. The eyes met mine, and I felt a shock of cold that had nothing to do with the water temperature. Then it smiled and went back to work. I kicked backward, my training finally overriding my shock. Get to the surface. Get out. Call for help. The standard protocols for when everything goes wrong. But when I turned around, I wasn't where I thought I was. The main pool should have been right there, but instead I was in a narrow channel between massive boulders. The bone lines stretched in both directions, and I couldn't tell which way was back. My light caught movement to my left. Another figure, identical to the first, working on the bones. Then another to my right, and another ahead. There were dozens of them down here, all working together. All building something. A structure that spanned the entire canyon floor, invisible from the surface, but massive and complex down here in the dark. I checked my dive computer. I'd been down for 12 minutes, plenty of air left, but my head wasn't right. The cold, maybe, or lack of sleep. I was seeing things that couldn't be there. Mass hallucination from nitrogen narcosis, even though I wasn't deep enough for that. One of the figures drifted closer. Up close, I could see through it, make out the canyon wall behind its translucent body. It reached out with one hand and touched my shoulder. The cold was instant and bone deep, spreading from the point of contact down my arm. It gestured toward the bone structure, then at me. An invitation. A request. Come join us. Come help build. I yanked away and kicked hard for what I hoped was up. My fins churned the silt into a blinding cloud. I couldn't see anything, couldn't tell which way I was going, just knew I had to get away. From those cold, patient hands. My head broke the surface between two boulders. I gasped in air, ripping my regulator out. The sky above was the color of old bruises. When had it gotten so late? I'd gone down in full daylight. I dragged myself onto a flat rock and checked my computer again. It showed I'd been underwater for 4 hours. That was impossible. My tank only held 90 minutes of air, and I'd never blacked out. I remembered everything. The figures, the bones, the cold touch on my shoulder. All of it crystal clear. My watch agreed with the dive computer. 7:47 p.m. I'd gone down at 4:15. The radio hissed to life. Sam, where the hell are you? I'm calling search and rescue, Patricia. She sounded terrified. I'm here. I managed. At the bottom, I'm okay. You've been down there for 4 hours. I thought, Jesus, Sam, I thought you'd drowned. I don't know what happened, I said, but Patricia, there's something down here, something wrong. The bodies? I'd completely forgotten about the kayakers. I found one. But there's people working underwater, building something with bones. Silence on the radio. Then, Sam, you need to come up, right now. You're hypothermic, you're not thinking straight. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd lost time due to the cold, my brain filling in the gaps with hallucinations. That made more sense than what I thought I'd seen. But when I looked down at my shoulder, where that thing had touched me, there was a mark on my wetsuit. A handprint in white frost, perfectly preserved even though I was out of the water. The kind of frost that shouldn't exist in 45-degree weather. I keyed the radio again. Patricia, I need you to do something. Check the archives, see if there were any mass drownings in this canyon, logging accidents, floods, anything. Sam, please. Just check. I started the climb back up, my muscles screaming from the cold and exertion. The 5 rappel line was right where I'd left it, but now it was covered in that same white frost. I touched it carefully. It was solid ice, even though the surrounding rock was dry. Halfway up, I heard it. A sound like hammering, rhythmic and steady, echoing up from the canyon floor. Metal on stone, the sound of construction, the sound of work. I climbed faster. Patricia had coffee and dry clothes waiting at the top. I changed behind my truck, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the buttons. The frost handprint on my wetsuit had melted, leaving no trace except the memory. "You look like hell," Patricia said, handing me a thermos. "Feel like it too." The coffee was hot enough to hurt going down. "Did you find anything?" She pulled out a folder. "Yeah, and Sam, it's not good. There was a logging camp down there in the 1880 seconds, Blackwater Lumber Company. October 1881, there was a flash flood. The whole camp got swept away, 40 men, gone in minutes. They never recovered any of the bodies. 40, the same number of figures I'd seen underwater. There's more," Patricia continued. "According to the old records, rescue teams reported seeing strange arrangements of debris in the canyon for years afterward, logs and equipment laid out in patterns. The local Cherokee claimed the spirits of the drowned were trying to rebuild their camp." I stared at the canyon edge. From up here, the falls looked peaceful in the twilight, just pretty water and ancient rock. But I knew what was down there now. What was still down there, working in the cold and dark. "We need to close the canyon," I said. "No more diving, no more kayaking." "On what grounds?" "That you saw ghosts?" "On the grounds that we've got 3 dead kayakers and unstable conditions. We don't need to mention anything else." Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but she nodded. "I'll call it in." "But Sam, you know they're going to want to recover those bodies. They'll send teams down there." "I know. I thought about those translucent figures, working with patient determination. Tell them to send a lot of people. And tell them not to go alone." We spent that night in my truck, taking turns sleeping while the other kept watch. I don't know what I thought we were watching for. It's not like ghosts could climb 200 feet of cliff face. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those figures working, building something vast and complex in the underwater darkness. At dawn, the search and rescue team arrived. 6 divers, all professionals from the state police. I briefed them on the locations, the conditions, the dangers. I didn't mention the figures. What was I supposed to say? Watch out for construction crews made of dead loggers? They went down at 8 a.m. By noon, they'd recovered all 3 kayakers' bodies and confirmed what I'd seen: human bones arranged in architectural patterns spanning the entire canyon floor. "It's the damnedest thing," the team leader, a guy named Marcus I'd worked with before, told me. "Like someone's building bridges down there. Spans going from boulder to boulder, perfectly engineered, but it's all bones, ribs for trusses, femurs for beams, skulls as support structures." "How long would it take to build something like that?" I asked. Marcus shrugged. "With modern equipment? Months. Underwater, in these conditions, with nothing but bones? It's impossible. Can't be done." "But it's there." "Yeah, it's there." One of the other divers, a young woman named Chen, pulled me aside. "Ranger Ravencrest? I saw something down there. Thought you should know." "What kind of something?" "People. Or shapes like people. Translucent, kind of blue-green. They were working on the bone structures." She glanced at the other divers, lowered her voice. "I know how it sounds, but I'm not the only one who saw them. 3 of us did, but the others won't admit it." "Did they try to touch?" Her eyes went wide. "How did you know?" "One of them reached for me, and it was so cold. Like sticking your hand in liquid nitrogen. I got out fast." I showed her the frost mark on my wetsuit, still visible in the right light, a perfect handprint. "They touched me too. Been down there 4 hours by my watch, but I only remember 90 minutes. "What are they?" "The men who died here. Still working, still trying to finish whatever they started before the flood took them." I looked at the canyon. "They're building something, and I think they want help." That afternoon, Patricia came back with more research. She'd been up all night in the county archives, digging through old newspapers and logging company records. "The Blackwater Lumber Company was building a bridge when the flood hit," she said, spreading out yellowed documents on the truck's hood. "A massive timber bridge to span the canyon, make it easier to get the logs out. They were 3 months from completion when the flood came. The company went bankrupt afterward. The bridge was never finished." I studied the old plans. The design matched exactly what I'd seen on the canyon floor, the same spans, the same support structure. Except the original called for timber and iron, not human bone. They're still building it, I said. After 102 years, they're still trying to finish the job. That's insane, is it? I pointed at the plans. Look at the dedication. They worked that bridge every day for 9 months. It was their entire lives. Then the flood took them mid-shift, mid-project. Maybe dying didn't stop them. Maybe they just kept working. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then, Sam, if they finish it, if they complete whatever they're building down there, what happens? I didn't have an answer. But that night, I went back to the canyon edge alone. I could hear the hammering again, clearer now. Not metal on stone, bone on bone, the sound of construction without modern tools, without light, without breath. The sound of the dead refusing to stop. I rappelled down in the darkness, just far enough to see the water. My flashlight caught something I hadn't noticed before. The bone bridge was bigger, substantially bigger. What had been simple spans between boulders yesterday now included elaborate trusses and support structures. In one day, less than a day, they'd added weeks' worth of construction. And they were working faster. I could see dozens of the translucent figures now, even from the surface. They moved with supernatural coordination, passing bones to each other in perfect synchronization. No words, no signals, just shared purpose. One of them looked up at me. I recognized the face, or the ghost of a face. It had been clearer underwater, more solid. It raised one hand in greeting, or maybe an invitation. The bone bridge now spanned multiple pools, reaching from the main waterfall pool downstream, toward the canyon exit. If it reached that far, if it somehow breached the canyon entirely, I didn't want to think about what might cross that bridge, what might use it to return from whatever dark place they'd been trapped in for a century. I climbed back up and made a decision. Tomorrow, I'd go down there with tools, iron tools. If the old Cherokee warnings were right, I'd break the bone bridge apart, scatter the pieces, do whatever it took to stop them. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be enough. They'd been building this bridge for 102 years in secret, waiting for the right conditions, the right flood, the right time. And now their time had come. I went back to my office and spent the rest of the night gathering equipment. Iron crowbars, steel cable cutters, even a sledgehammer. If I couldn't stop them with words, maybe I could stop them with force. Patricia found me at 4 a.m., loading my truck. "You're going down there again." It wasn't a question. "I have to stop them." "Sam, you don't even know what they're trying to do." "Yes, I do." I showed her my final piece of research, a map of every drowning in Blackwater Canyon over the past century. 47 dots marked the locations where people had died, and every single one of those dots fell along the path of the bone bridge. They're not just building a bridge, they're creating a path to collect all the people the canyon took. Every victim, every drowning, every death. They're trying to bring everyone back. That's impossible. So are underwater construction workers who've been dead for a century. I checked my gear one more time. But here's the thing, the Cherokee stories Patricia found mention something else. They say, if the bridge is completed, if it reaches all the way through the canyon, then the dead can walk back into the world of the living. All of them. 40 men who drowned in 1881, plus 47 more who've died since. And you think you can stop them? Alone? I strapped on my tank. I spent 8 months in the tunnels of Kuchi, fighting an enemy I couldn't see in darkness, so complete you couldn't tell if your eyes were open or closed. If I could survive that, I can handle this. But I wasn't sure. Not really. The sun was just starting to lighten the eastern sky when I went down. The canyon was quieter than before, the water level had dropped overnight, and the roar of the falls was more distant. That should have been good news, but it meant I could hear the other sound more clearly. The hammering, the building, the endless work of the dead. I hit the water at the main pool and dove straight down. My light caught the bone bridge immediately. It had grown again overnight. The structure now had multiple levels, elaborate archways, even decorative elements. It was no longer just functional, it was beautiful. And it was almost finished. I swam to the nearest support span and positioned my crowbar. One good strike should shatter the aged bone, bring the whole section down. I hesitated. The translucent figures had stopped working. All of them. 40 dead loggers stood motionless in the water, watching me, waiting to see what I'd do. The nearest one drifted closer. I could see its face clearly now, a man in his 30s, with a thick beard and kind eyes. He looked tired, so very tired. He gestured to the bridge, then to himself. To the other workers. "A question, please. We're almost done. Let us finish." I raised the crowbar higher. "You're dead. You need to stay dead." The figure's face fell. It looked at me with such profound sadness that I almost lowered the bar. Then it shook its head and pointed downstream. At the spots where the other victims had died, at the 47 souls still trapped in the cold darkness, still drowning over and over in the moment of their deaths, it pointed to the bridge. The path to freedom. The way home. "I can't let you do this," I said. My voice sounded weak even to my own ears. The figure studied me for a long moment, then it raised one translucent hand and touched my chest, right over my heart. I gasped as images flooded my mind. The flash flood of 1881. Men screaming as the wall of water hit the logging camp, trying to save each other, grabbing hands, pulling friends to safety, failing, drowning together in the churning darkness. And then, awareness. The horrible knowledge that they were dead but not gone, trapped in the cold water, watching as years passed and more victims joined them. Unable to move on, unable to rest, unable to do anything but wait. Until now, until the conditions were right and they could work again, could build again, could finish what the flood had interrupted. The figure pulled its hand back. It looked at me with understanding. It knew I had my own dead brothers from Vietnam who'd died in those tunnels, friends who'd never made it home. It knew I understood being trapped between life and death. It gestured one more time. "Please." I lowered the crowbar. The figure nodded once, a gesture of thanks, and returned to work. The others resumed their building with renewed energy. I floated there, suspended in the rust-colored water, watching them construct their impossible bridge, and then I realized my mistake. The water around me was getting warmer. No, not warmer. It was moving wrong, flowing uphill, defying gravity and physics. The current pulled at me, dragging me toward the bridge, toward the incomplete sections that still needed building. I kicked hard, trying to escape, but the current was too strong. The 40 workers had stopped again, and now they were all looking at me. Not with kindness anymore. With need. The bridge wasn't just for the victims, it needed builders too. Needed fresh workers to complete the final sections. Needed me. I grabbed for a boulder, but my gloves slid off the smooth rock. The current pulled me into the bone structure itself. Ribs closed around me like a cage. Skulls watched with empty sockets. The temperature dropped so fast my wetsuit crackled with ice. The translucent figures surrounded me. 40 sets of hands reached out, touching my arms, my legs, my chest. The cold was absolute, the cold of death, of the grave, of water that had drowned too many men. One of them placed a bone in my hand. A femur, worn smooth by a century of current. It fit my grip perfectly. "Build," the touches said. "Join us. Stay here forever. Work until the bridge is complete." I looked at the bone in my hand. Looked at the unfinished sections of bridge stretching downstream. Looked at the patient, tired faces of 40 men who just wanted to finish their job and rest. Then I thought about my daughters. About Patricia, waiting above. About sunlight and warmth and all the things I'd miss if I stayed down here forever. I dropped the bone and kicked upward with everything I had. The figures grabbed for me, but I was faster. My Vietnam training came back. How to fight in confined spaces, how to navigate in absolute darkness, how to never, ever give up. I twisted through the bone structure, breaking spans, collapsing sections, destroying months of their work in seconds. The current fought me. The figures pulled at my tank, my fins, my arms, but I'd escaped tighter situations than this. I'd crawled through tunnels filled with water and bodies and fear. This was nothing compared to Q-Chi. My head broke the surface and I swam for the shore, not caring about the equipment I was shedding, just needing to get out. I dragged myself onto a boulder and looked back. The bone bridge was collapsing. Sections I'd broken pulled other sections down. The entire elaborate structure was falling apart, raining bones into the canyon pools. And the figures, all 40 of them, stood in the water watching. They didn't look angry, just disappointed, and so tired. I'd stopped them. But I hadn't freed them. They closed Blackwater Canyon to diving that afternoon. Structural instability, the official report said. Dangerous underwater hazards. Nothing about bones or bridges or dead men who wouldn't stop working. I stayed at the canyon for 3 more days, watching from the rim. The bone bridge didn't rebuild. The figures didn't appear. Whatever chance they'd had was gone, at least for now. Patricia drove me home on the 4th day. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? You did the right thing, she finally offered as we left the park. Did I? She didn't have an answer to that. I took a month off, spent it in Charleston with my daughters, trying to remember what normal life felt like. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 40 faces. Every shower, every rainstorm, every glass of water, I saw them working, building, trying so hard to finish something that death itself couldn't stop them from attempting. The nightmares came next. Dreams of drowning, of cold hands pulling me down, of bone bridges spanning endless canyons. I'd wake up gasping, certain I could hear hammering somewhere in the distance. My ex-wife noticed. You look terrible, Sam. Just tired. But it was more than that. I'd developed a fear of water that I couldn't shake, couldn't take baths, could barely drink. The sight of anything liquid made my skin crawl. When I went back to work, I requested a transfer. They gave me a position in the Badlands desert country, dry as dust, nothing but rock and sand for miles. Patricia called me the week before I left. Sam, you need to know there's been reports at other sites, other canyons, other rivers, same story, bones arranged in patterns. Construction that shouldn't be possible. How many sites? 12. All of them places where multiple people drowned together. All of them showing the same kind of activity. I thought about that. Thought about how many rivers and canyons there were in Appalachia. How many logging camps and mining operations and construction projects had ended in mass drowning over the centuries. How many groups of dead workers were down there in the cold and dark, still trying to finish what they'd started. There's one more thing, Patricia said. Remember the rescue rope you left down there? The one you used to escape? What about it? They found it yesterday when they did the final safety survey. Sam, it had marks on it. Tool marks, like something had been sawing through it. Old marks, the rope experts say the cuts match logging saws from the 1,880 seconds. My blood went cold. They'd tried to keep me there. Tried to cut my escape route while I was underwater. If I'd waited even a few more minutes. Be careful out in the desert, Patricia said. And Sam? Maybe stay away from flash flood areas. I moved to the Badlands in November, spent my days hiking through dry canyons and red rock formations. No water, no rivers, nothing but sun and stone. But sometimes, during the rare desert rains, I hear it. That distant hammering, that patient, endless sound of construction. They're still building. All of them. In every canyon, every river, every place where people died together with unfinished work in their hands. Building bridges between death and life, between the past and the present. And someday, I think, one of those bridges will be completed. The conditions will be perfect, the time will be right, and 40 workers, or 100, or 1,000, will walk across it and back into the world. I just hope I'm far away when it happens. My name is Samuel Ravencrest. I spent 20 years as a water rescue specialist. I've pulled 47 bodies from rivers and streams. I've seen death up close, in war and in peace. And I'm telling you now, if you ever go diving in Blackwater Canyon or any deep canyon with a history of drowning and you see bones arranged in patterns, get out. Get out fast. Because the dead stay dead in my experience. At least, they're supposed to. But in Blackwater Canyon, I learned that some people refuse to let death stop them from finishing what they started. And they're always looking for help. Always. My name is Margaret Thornfield, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a park ranger in Jefferson National Forest for 17 years now, and before that, I spent a decade in Child Protective Services. People think that's an odd career change, but it makes sense to me. Both jobs are about finding lost children and bringing them home safe. I'm 43 years old, and I know these mountains better than most people know their own backyards. The Pine Mountain section, where I work, sits in Poor Valley, a name that tells you everything about the people who've lived here for generations. It's remote. The nearest town is 18 miles away on a dirt road that washes out every spring. No cell phone service, no internet, just trees, rocks, and silence. My ranger station is a small cabin near the old Poor Valley Road. I keep files on every missing person case in these woods going back 50 years, 83 children I've found and brought home safe. That's what keeps me going, even on the hard days. I lost my own daughter when she was 6. Car accident. That was 15 years ago, and it's why I do this work. Every child I find is a chance to do what I couldn't do for Emma, my Emma, not the one in this story. I never remarried. The mountains became my family. People sometimes ask if I believe in the supernatural. I always tell them the same thing. Child psychology explains imaginary friends just fine. Kids don't actually disappear into thin air. I've seen enough real-world horrors: abusive parents, trafficking rings, cult compounds hidden in the woods, to know you don't need ghosts to explain missing children. But that was before Pine Mountain changed my mind about everything. It was late August 1991, during a heat wave that turned the forest into an oven. The humidity was so thick you could drink the air. Weather Service kept warning about flash floods, even though we hadn't seen rain in 3 weeks. The drought had turned every stream to a trickle and exposed rocks that hadn't seen daylight in decades. That's when the Holloway family reported their daughter missing. Emma Holloway was 8 years old, blonde hair, gap-toothed smile in the photo her mother showed me. She'd been playing in the yard of their cabin, one of the few vacation rentals in the area, while her parents unpacked. When they came outside 20 minutes later, she was gone. She was talking to someone, Mrs. Holloway said, hands shaking. I heard her through the window. She was saying, "Yes, I'd love to come." "Is it far?" I thought maybe she'd met another family's kids. But there were no other families. I'd checked the permits. The Holloways were the only people registered in that section for 50 miles. "Did you see who she was talking to?" I asked. Mrs. Holloway shook her head. When I looked out, she was alone. But she was smiling and nodding like someone was right there with her. I started the standard protocol. Called in Tom Bridgewater, my assistant ranger, 26 years old, good tracker, scared of spiders but nobody's perfect. We organized a search grid, interviewed the parents separately, checked all the normal hiding spots kids use: caves, hollow logs, thick rhododendron patches we call laurel hells. Emma's tracks were easy to find, small sneaker prints in the dust, heading east toward the ridge. But here's what made my stomach drop. Her footprints were joined by others. Lots of others. Small prints, child-sized, all around hers like she'd been surrounded by a group. "Another family must be camping illegally," Tom said, kneeling beside the trail. "Maybe Emma met their kids and went with them." "Maybe," I said. But something felt wrong. The other prints were too small, too many, and they were bare feet, not shoes. What family lets a dozen kids run around barefoot in this heat, over these rocks? We followed the tracks up the mountain. The afternoon sun beat down through the trees, and sweat soaked through my uniform. Cicadas screamed in the branches, no birds singing. That should have been my first real clue. When the birds go quiet, something's wrong. Then I heard it. Laughter, high and clear, echoing through the trees, children laughing. "You hear that?" Tom's face lit up. "They must be close." We ran toward the sound, scrambling up the rocky slope. But when we crested the ridge, there was nothing. Just empty forest stretching in every direction. The laughter had stopped. "Emma!" I shouted. "Emma Holloway!" My voice echoed back, but no child answered. That's when I saw the tea party. In a small clearing, someone had set up a perfect little tea party. A threadbare blanket spread on the ground. Chipped china cups arranged in a circle. 20 places set, with acorns for food and flower petals in the cups for pretend tea. But only one set of fresh footprints led to the blanket. Emma's sneaker prints stopped right at the edge, like she'd sat down, and around the blanket, in the dust, were dozens of small bare footprints. Old prints and new prints, layered over each other like the same group had gathered here many times. "Kids must have been here recently," Tom said, but his voice sounded uncertain. I knelt beside one of the cups. It was old, the kind of china you'd find in an antique shop. The pattern was faded, but I could make it out tiny roses and gold trim. Expensive stuff for a child's tea party. And there, at the bottom of one cup, the liquid wasn't water. It was still warm. "Emma was just here," I said. "Minutes ago." "Where did she go?" The prince led away from the tea party in every direction, like the group had scattered. Emma's tracks continued east, but now they were running, not walking, running. We followed them deeper into the forest, toward an area I rarely patrol. Too overgrown, too easy to get lost. The rhododendrons grew so thick they blocked out the sun, creating green tunnels that wound through the mountain like a maze. My radio crackled. Nothing but static. "Station, this is Ranger Thornfield," I said into the handset. "We're tracking the missing girl east of Poor Valley Road. Do you copy?" More static. Then, underneath it, something else. Singing. Children's voices singing "Ring Around the Rosie" in that old-fashioned way, slow and eerie. Asterisk, "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down." Asterisk, "You're picking up something," Tom said. "Maybe a radio signal from town?" "There's no town in range," I said. "And that's not how radio interference works." The singing continued, getting louder. Then it cut off, and a child's voice spoke clearly through the static. Asterisk, "Maggie should come play too." Asterisk, I dropped the radio. It hit the ground and went silent. "Did that thing just say your name?" Tom's face had gone pale. "Equipment malfunction," I said, but my hands were shaking as I picked it up. "Cheap electronics, heat damage." We kept following the tracks. The forest changed as we walked. The trees looked wrong, too straight, too evenly spaced, like they'd been planted in rows. And between them, I started seeing shapes. Rectangular depressions in the ground, overgrown with moss and ferns. Foundations. Old building foundations. "What is this place?" Tom asked. Then I remembered. "The sanitarium," I said. My God, I forgot about the sanitarium. 20 years ago, when I first started working here, an old-timer had told me the story. Back in the 1922, there'd been a children's tuberculosis sanitarium up on Pine Mountain, a place where families sent sick kids for fresh mountain air that was supposed to cure them. 200 children lived here at one time, and almost all of them died here. The state shut it down in 1928 after a particularly bad winter killed 40 kids in 1 month. The bodies were buried in mass graves somewhere on the property, but nobody knew exactly where. The buildings were torn down, and the forest took it all back. "We're standing on a graveyard," I said quietly. That's when we heard Emma scream. It wasn't far, maybe 50 yards ahead. We crashed through the underbrush, not caring about the thorns tearing at our clothes. Tom got there first. He stopped so suddenly, I almost ran into him. Emma was standing in another clearing, surrounded by children. At least, I thought they were children. 20 or more kids, aged maybe 5 to 12, in old-fashioned clothes. Girls in long white dresses, boys in short pants and suspenders. They were playing Ring Around the Rosie, holding hands in a circle, with Emma in the middle. "Emma," I shouted. "Come here, sweetie. Your parents are worried." She looked at me, but she didn't move. "I can't leave yet, Miss Ranger. We're in the middle of a game. It's rude to quit." The other children kept circling, singing that song. But something was wrong with them. They moved in, perfect unison, like puppets on strings. Their skin was too pale, almost gray. And when the sunlight hit them, they cast no shadows. No shadows at all. "Emma, step out of the circle right now," I said, using my firm voice. The one that usually makes kids listen. She shook her head. "They said I could stay forever. They're my friends now. They said I don't have to go back to the sad place." "What sad place?" "Home. Mommy and Daddy fight all the time. They think I don't hear, but I do. Here, nobody fights. Everyone just plays." The children in the circle stopped singing. They all turned to look at me at once, their heads swiveling in that too smooth way. Up close, I could see their eyes were wrong, cloudy and distant, like they were looking at something far away. One girl, maybe 9 years old with long black braids, stepped forward. "Hello, Maggie," Do you want to play too? We have room for more. I hadn't told them my name. Emma didn't know my name. Nobody had introduced me. How do you know who I am? I asked. The girl smiled. We know all the rangers. You're the nice one. You look for lost children. But these children aren't lost, Maggie. They're home. Tom grabbed my arm. Boss, we need to get out of here. Something's really wrong with these kids. But I couldn't look away from them. Now that I was paying attention, I could see more wrong details. Their clothes were too clean for kids playing in the woods. No dirt, no stains, no wear. And underneath the smell of pine trees and earth, there was something else. Something chemical and sharp that I recognized from my childhood. Disinfectant. The smell of hospitals. Emma, take my hand right now, I said, reaching toward her. She hesitated, glancing at the pale children around her. They weren't smiling anymore. Emma can't leave, one of the boys said flatly. We invited her. She accepted. Those are the rules. What rules? I demanded. The rules of the game. If you're invited and you say yes, you have to stay until the game is over. Fine. When is the game over? The children looked at each other, confused by the question. Then the girl with braids said, The game is never over. We've been playing for. She frowned, thinking hard. I don't remember. A long time. Emma's face was starting to look different, paler. Her freckles were fading. When she breathed, I could hear a wetness in her chest, a rattle that made my blood run cold. My daughter had that sound near the end. Pneumonia. Fluid in the lungs. Emma, you're getting sick, I said. These children are making you sick. You need to come with us now. I'm not sick, Emma said, but even as she spoke, she coughed. A deep, wet cough that went on too long. When she pulled her hand away from her mouth, there were flecks of blood on her palm. Tom swore under his breath. Jesus Christ, she's got TB symptoms. That's impossible. TB doesn't work that fast. The children started holding hands again, forming a tighter circle around Emma. They began singing a new song, one I didn't recognize. Asterisk, come and play, come and stay, in the mountain far away. Cough and wheeze, fall to knees, join us in the oldest game. Asterisk, stop it. I rushed forward, trying to break through the circle, but the moment I touched one of the children's hands, pain shot through my arm like electricity. The world tilted. Suddenly, I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was standing in a long hallway with white walls and a black and white checkered floor. Gas lamps flickered on the walls. Rows of doors stretched in both directions, and behind each door, I could hear children coughing. That wet, terrible cough that tears through young lungs. A nurse walked past me, her dress rustling, not seeing me at all. She carried a tray of medicine bottles. I followed her into one of the rooms. 12 iron beds lined the walls, 6 on each side. In every bed, a child lay dying. Some were crying, some were too weak to move. The smell of sickness filled the air, blood and fever and fear. Please, one little girl whispered, reaching toward the nurse. Please, I want to go home. The nurse didn't even look at her, just set down the medicine and left. The vision shifted. Now I was outside, watching men dig trenches in the frozen ground. It was winter, snow everywhere. They lifted small bodies wrapped in sheets and laid them in the trenches. Dozens of bodies. More than I could count. No prayers, no markers, no names. Just dirt thrown over the top and the mountain taking it all back. Then I was back in the forest, on my knees, gasping for air. Tom was shaking my shoulders. Boss, Maggie, what happened? You just collapsed. They died here, I managed to say. All of them. No one came for them. They died alone and scared, and nobody even marked their graves. The children had stopped singing. They stood in a silent circle, watching me, with those cloudy eyes. Emma was sitting on the ground now, looking gray and weak. The girl with braids knelt beside me. You see now, you understand. We're not bad. We just don't want to be alone anymore. It's cold and dark when you're alone. You're dead, I said, the words catching in my throat. You've been dead for 70 years. Are we? She looked down at her hands, genuinely confused. We're still here. We still play. How can we be dead if we're still playing? Because dead doesn't mean gone, I said. You're ghosts. Spirits. You need to move on. We can't move on. Nobody came for us. Nobody remembered us, so we stayed. And now we have new friends. She nodded toward Emma. Friends who won't leave us. Not ever. Emma's breathing was getting worse. Each breath sounded like it was being dragged through water. Her lips were starting to turn blue. I stood up, my mind racing through everything I knew about ghosts, folklore, superstition. Most of it was nonsense, but right now, I was willing to try anything. Tom, your canteen. Is the water from Slate Creek? He nodded, handing it to me. Slate Creek was fed by springs, moving water, always flowing. Running water. The old stories said spirits couldn't cross running water. I poured it in a circle around Emma and me. It soaked into the dry ground immediately, but maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the intention was enough. The children hissed and stepped back from the water line. Iron, I said to Tom. Do you have anything iron? Your belt buckle? Your knife? Anything? He pulled out a small pocket knife. The handle was iron, cheap old metal. I took it and rang it against his canteen. The sound echoed through the clearing, a pure, clear note. The children covered their ears, faces twisting in pain. Stop, the girl with braids cried. That hurts. Why are you hurting us? Let Emma go, I said. Let her go and I'll stop. We can't. The rules. I don't care about your rules. I rang the knife against the canteen again, harder. She's alive. She deserves to grow up, to have a life, to see the world beyond this mountain. We deserved that too, a small boy said quietly. But we never got it. The truth of that hit me like a physical blow. He was right. These children had been robbed of everything. Their lives, their futures, their very names forgotten. What right did I have to deny them this one thing they'd found, this one way to not be alone? But then I looked at Emma, barely breathing, slipping away into their cold world, and I knew what I had to do. You're right, I said to the children, lowering the knife. You deserved better. You deserved to be remembered and loved and mourned. The world forgot you, and that's a terrible thing. The children stopped covering their ears, looking at me with those ancient, sad eyes. But taking Emma won't fix what happened to you. It won't fill the emptiness or bring back what you lost. You'll just be creating more grieving families, more forgotten children. We don't want to forget, the girl with braids said. That's why we need new friends, so we can remember what it was like to be alive. You don't need new friends for that, I said. You need someone to remember you, to say your names. I knelt in the dirt, right at the edge of the water circle. Emma was behind me, so weak now she could barely keep her eyes open. Tell me your names, I said. All of you. I'll remember them, I'll write them down. I'll make sure the world knows you existed. The children looked at each other, uncertain. Then, slowly, the girl with braids spoke. Mary Catherine Sullivan. I was 9 years old. I came here in 1925. One by one, the others began speaking. Names I wrote in my notebook with shaking hands. James Whitmore, Sarah Chen, Thomas Butler, Alice Remington. Names from every corner of Appalachia, some from farther away. Children whose families had sent them to the mountain to die, hoping for a miracle that never came. 23 names total. 23 children standing in this clearing, trying so hard to hold on to existence that they dragged others down with them. When the last child had spoken, I said, I promise I will remember you, every single one of you. But you have to let Emma go. Will you come back? Mary Catherine asked, will you visit us? We're so lonely, Maggie. My heart broke. Yes, I lied. I'll come back. You're lying, she said flatly. Adults always lie to children. You're right, I admitted. I won't come back. But I'll do something better. I'll make sure everyone knows your story. I'll make sure they put up a marker with all your names. You won't be forgotten anymore. That's not the same as having friends, a small boy said. No, I agreed. It's not. But it's what I can give you. And it's more than you have now, which is nothing but this mountain and your eternal game. The children were silent, processing this. Then Mary Catherine said, what about Emma? She said yes. She accepted the invitation. The rules are made up, I interrupted. You made up the rules because you're scared. You're scared of being alone, of being forgotten, of admitting that you're dead. But rules can be changed. You can choose to let her go. And if we don't? I stood up. gripping Tom's iron knife so hard my knuckles were white. Then I'll wring this knife until the sound breaks you apart. I'll pour running water on every inch of this clearing. I'll bring iron bells and crucifixes and salt and every other thing the old stories say hurts ghosts. I'll make this place so miserable, you'll beg to move on. It was a bluff. I had no idea if any of that would actually work. But I said it with every ounce of authority I had, the same voice I'd used 1,000 times to face down abusive parents and dangerous situations. The children looked at each other. Some were crying now, not with tears, because ghosts don't cry, but with the memory of crying, faces twisted in that expression of grief. "We just wanted friends," Mary Catherine whispered. "I know," I said, my own eyes burning. "But Emma can't be your friend. She's alive. She belongs with the living." For a long moment, nothing happened. The forest was absolutely silent. No wind, no birds, no insects. Even the cicadas had stopped screaming. Then Mary Catherine knelt beside Emma and touched her forehead gently. The color started coming back to Emma's face. Her breathing eased. The rattle in her chest faded. "Go home," Mary Catherine said. "Grow up, be happy. Remember us sometimes, but don't come back here. This place is for the dead." Emma's eyes opened. She looked around, confused, like she was waking from a dream. "Miss Ranger? What happened?" "Nothing, sweetie," I said, lifting her in my arms. She was solid and warm and very much alive. "Just a bad dream. Let's get you back to your parents." I carried her out of the clearing. Tom followed, neither of us looking back. We could feel the children watching us go, their cold attention like ice on our necks. As we reached the edge of the old sanitarium grounds, I heard Mary Catherine's voice, one last time, carried on a wind that shouldn't exist. Asterisk, remember your promise, Maggie. Remember us. Asterisk, I will, I whispered. The moment we crossed out of the sanitarium area, all the sounds of the forest came rushing back. Birds singing, insects buzzing, wind rustling through leaves, like someone had turned the volume back on. My radio crackled to life. "Station to Ranger Thornfield. Do you copy?" "Over. This is Thornfield. I've found Emma Holloway. She's safe. We're bringing her down." "Copy that. Good work, Maggie." Emma fell asleep in my arms before we made it to the trailhead. Her parents were crying when they saw her, grabbing her from me, checking her over for injuries. "She's fine," I told them, "just tired, got lost in the woods, had a little adventure. Kids do it all the time up here." They thanked me over and over, but I barely heard them. I was thinking about 23 children who would never have parents crying with relief over them again. The official report said Emma Holloway wandered off and got lost in the dense undergrowth. Mild dehydration and exhaustion, but otherwise unharmed. The family left the next day and never came back to Pine Mountain. Tom and I never talked about what we saw. What could we say? Who would believe us? But I kept my promise. I spent weeks in the library and county records office, tracking down names. The sanitarium records were incomplete. Many children had been admitted under false names or no names at all. But I found 87 confirmed deaths on Pine Mountain between 1,920 and 1,928. I wrote a proposal to the Forest Service for a historical marker. It took 2 years of paperwork and fighting with bureaucrats who didn't care about dead children from 70 years ago. But finally, in 1993, they put up a bronze plaque at the base of Pine Mountain. Asterisk, in memory of the children of Pine Mountain Sanitarium, 1,920 to 1,928. May they rest in peace. Asterisk. Below that, every name I could find. 87 names in small letters, including Mary Catherine Sullivan and the 22 others who'd spoken to me that day. I never went back to that clearing. I transferred to a different section of the forest. Other rangers patrol Poor Valley now, young ones who don't know the stories. But sometimes, on quiet nights in my cabin, I hear them. Children laughing in the distance. The faint sound of singing carried on the wind. Ring Around the Rosie, played somewhere up on the mountain in the dark. And sometimes I wonder if keeping them remembered is enough. Or if they're still up there, playing their eternal game, waiting for the next lonely child to accept their invitation. Emma Holloway sent me a letter 6 months later. Her parents had gotten divorced, and she was living with her mom now. Things were better, she said. But she still had nightmares about the children in old-fashioned clothes who wanted her to stay and play forever. Asterisk, they weren't mean. Asterisk, she wrote in her careful child's handwriting. Asterisk, they were just sad. I hope someone plays with them someday. Asterisk, I keep that letter in my desk, along with my notebook full of names, and I keep a pocket knife made of iron, just in case. Because here's what I learned on Pine Mountain. The dead don't always rest peacefully. Sometimes they linger, especially when they died young and afraid and forgotten. And sometimes they get lonely enough to reach out to the living, not understanding that what they're offering isn't friendship, it's a slow slide into death. If you have kids, and they start talking about imaginary friends who are always cold, who wear old-fashioned clothes, who only play during the day and disappear at sunset, pay attention. Don't let them play alone. And for God's sake, teach them to say no when strangers invite them to tea parties. I'm 58 years old now, retired from the Forest Service. I live in town, far from the mountains, but I still wake up some nights thinking I hear children singing, still wondering if they forgave me for leaving them alone again. Last week, I got a call from a ranger I used to work with. A family had reported their son missing near Poor Valley. 7 years old, last seen playing alone in their yard, talking to someone his parents couldn't see. They found the boy after 2 days, disoriented, hypothermic despite the summer heat. With a strange rattle in his chest, he kept talking about the nice children who wanted him to stay forever. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. The children of Pine Mountain are still playing their game, still sending out invitations, still refusing to accept that the game ended 70 years ago, when they were buried in unmarked graves and forgotten by a world that had no more use for them. And the worst part? I understand why. Because being dead and alone is worse than being dead and remembered. Worse than haunting the living. Worse than stealing warmth from children who still have a chance at life. Sometimes, I think I should go back up there. Take the iron bells and the running water and the salt and force them to move on. End their lonely vigil once and for all. But I can't bring myself to do it, because I know what it's like to lose a child. And I know what I would do, what I would become if I thought I could keep her with me forever, even as a ghost. So I stay in town, I write down the names when someone finds another one in the records, I make sure the marker gets updated. It's all I can do, and I hope, somehow, it's enough. But on quiet nights, when the wind blows from the mountains, I still hear them singing. Ring, around the rosy, pocket full of posies. And I wonder whose child will hear them next.